So our next task is to do the rig on the end of the boom, and I've spent a lot of time studying the plan, trying to understand it, and I'm still not sure that I do. When you look at images of the Sherbourne, she appears to have 3 lines going up and down between the end of the boom and the block that we're going to put here, which makes no sense when you've got 2 single blocks, because you can only get 2 lines through. So it looks like we also tie the line off on the end of the boom as well. So it's basically coming off the top of this block, going up to the boom block, back down through this block, and then back up to the boom and tied off, is the conclusion I've come to, but it's not as clear as it could be on that point on the plans. And I'm looking at rigging plan 5 for this. I have looked at all the other rigging plans. There's nothing there that makes it clear. The lower boom gets done on a second block on the next eye. So we have to get this block on, and it's loop, block, loop is what we need. So we're going to start by just tying the thread to our eye. So that's my very first job. I'm doing my best to do this on camera, but you will have to bear with me because we've got macros on, and you know, I have to tie the knots, so I have to use my fingers. So making sure that we're roughly in the middle, so we've got equal amount of thread on both sides. Okay, then we're going to make a second loop. This is going to be the one that the block sits in. So again, equal on both sides. This is the tricky bit. I'm going to try and do it on camera, but what we're going to do is we're going to place the block inside and then we're going to tighten it up. So yeah, let's see how we get on with that. Not easy, I can assure you. I can't see what I'm doing, so I'm sure you can't, so I'm going to do this off camera. So what we've done is we've held the block in some self-locking tweezers so we can hold it in position and pull the threads tight. It's a real problem not having 3 arms at times, so sometimes you have to come up with a solution. This works well. What we're not going to do is trim these ends. We're going to glue it, and that because we've got to attach a line to that, and we'll talk about that next. So what I want to do is just pull this as tight as I can, and then we're going to put our CA glue on top of the knot there, and I'm putting a little bit on the side line there just to keep the thread glued onto that line there. I can take that tweezers off. So that's our block in place. Now we're using a different thread for this next stage. We're using thread, let me get this right, N1, which is the 1mm thread, F14. And what you need to do is you need to do the same thing as we did before with your thread. You need to estimate how much you need. So you need 3 lengths between this block and the block on the end of your boom. You need enough to tie it off on the end of the boom and enough to form a loop at the bottom here, because what we're going to do is we're going to create a little loop, a nice little tight eye like that. Can you see that? Is that in shot? Yeah, small little loop like that. Tie it off, and then we're going to tie it to the top of that block using these threads. So I'm going to do this off camera. You've seen me do this before. We're just going to make the little loop, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, I have made my little loop out of the thread. At the moment this is still attached to the spool of thread. I've not cut it to length. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we're going to attach this to the block. So we're going to start by just threading one of these ends, doesn't really matter which one, through the loop that I've made. Now you'll see what happens then is, because we've gone over one of these little side ones, that the eye is to one side, and we don't want that. We want the eye coming out of the middle at the top. So we will do that, and I'll show you how to achieve that. So we're going to start by just forming the knot in the same way that we ordinarily would. So there you go. So you can see we've got a knot here, and what's going to happen if we tie this tight is this is going to sit on one side where it is there, and it'll just be tied in. We don't want that to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this little arm here before we tighten it and pass that through the loop as well. So let me show you. Right, that's undone the knot, just bear with me. Right, there we go. So, by passing the arm of the knot, one of the lengths, through the eye again, that allows the knot, the eye loop, to travel to the centre of the knot. So you can see that now. Which means I can now pull this tight, like so, and my line is in the centre of the block. Like that, which looks a lot more authentic. So we'll get that nice and tight, and a little spot of glue. So then I'm going to hold the line in the position that it's going to ultimately be in, which is like that, and we're going to glue the eye and the line together So that should continue to point straight up once our glue is dried. So pull it tight again while the glue is still wet. Hold our eye into the correct position, like so. Make sure all my knots are tight. And that is that all rigged up. So I'll give that a moment to dry, trim our threads away. What we need to do now is calculate my lengths, cut that to length, and then I'll come back to you and we'll put this through the blocks. So as I have said, I cannot work out how this works using both blocks, with both blocks being single. This really needs to be a double block by all intents and purposes. So anyway, we're gonna go through this upper block. Make sure that you've moved your lower boom out of the way so that it's not on the wrong side of your ropes. You need to move your boom over to the port side. Okay, so we're threaded through our block. Now for me, the plan is telling me to tie that off. Yet there seems to be another line when you look at the instructions. Images, but I can't see how it terminates. Now if this was to pass through the lower block, it would need to go through another eye. The only eye I've got available is on the end, and then you could come down and tie it off, but that would absolutely be wrong. It really needs to go through the block again. So I am not sure. I want it to go through that bottom block, but that's going to create another 2 lines and we'll have 4 then. That doesn't seem right either. I think this should be a single at the bottom and a double at the top. But anyway, I think my gut feel is just to tie this off and not thread it through that block for now. So to do that, we tie it over the end of our bits, and then I'm going to just tighten this up. Okay, and then being careful not to have it drop off the bits here like it's just done. So difficult to do this on camera, guys. Right then, our next task is to try and rig this little block here. So the first thing I want to actually do is get the line through the top block before we tie it off on here, because that's going to help me hold the line out of the way. So let's start there. Okay, and then taken a little bit of thread and tied it ready to make a knot, and what we're going to do is we're just going to drop that over this block here. That's ready for tying off then. We can actually tighten that up a little bit. Okay. Now then, next job is to get our thread through our eye. Gonna use a needle thread, I think. Okay, what we're looking at doing is making ourselves a little loop and then seizing it up. So what I want to do is just clamp these two together. If I pull that line, that should bring them a bit closer. You can see that. Hopefully it's a little bit difficult. This is not at a perfect position for me so that I can film it. There we go. So just clamping the two lines together there. And then we'll lift this up and tie it around. He says, if I can clamp the clamp. There we go. Hopefully you can see that on camera. My angle is so difficult here that I can't even see my my little mini screen, so I can't see what you're seeing at all. There we go, pull that tight. Small dab of CA. Just to make sure it's all locked in place. There we go. Give that a moment to dry. Right, we can get in and trim that now. Don't worry if it's not perfect first time. Once we've got this all rigged up, we can always tidy up the knot. Okay, so that's our line attached. So we also need to remove the free end. And then we need to thread this line through that bottom block. Oh, didn't get it all the way through. You'd be amazed how much more difficult this is to do when you're filming. There we go. So we can gently pull that taut. We'll tighten it all up before we tie off. Right, so giving you an example of what not to do. I'm sure you'll realise what I've just done there. I've got the thread going behind the mast there and in front of the mast there, so we're going to actually lash this to the mast if we carry on. So we'll take it out and do it again. Okay, I've rectified that now, so what we want to do is make sure the block behaves the way we want. There we go, and then we can thread it through the second eye on the upper block. Once again, being mindful of the position of things, such as that rope there. There we go. Okay, and then that gets tied off on the bit at the bottom, and what we're going to do is, as we tie it off, we're just going to tighten these up like so. There we go. Now I think I've actually rigged this back to front. I think we want to go through that back block, the furthest hole, the hole on the left as you look at it first, then through the second one, so that the thread is falling on this side of the boom to go directly down. But you get the principle. So I'm going to re-rig this, and then we'll tie it off at the bottom. So there we go, I've just quickly re-rigged it so that the line naturally wants to fall on the right side of the boom, and we're now just going to put a little weight on that line because we've got the blocks nice and tight and I want to keep them that way, and that allows me freehand to tie off at the bottom. Okay, so we're going to pass our line through the bottom there. Just pull that nice and tight. We'll tighten this up in a sec. So wrap round and then back under. And we can take our little weight off the line now. So I think that's nice and tight. I'm just going to double check at the top that the block looks good, and it does. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to glue that where it is. We can finish off the tie-in in a sec, but because this is nice and tight, I don't want it to move. So I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on the thread there to lock it into place. So I know that's not going anywhere. Now I don't need to wait for the glue to dry. I can just carry on tying at this point. So we're going to go around again, this time on the other side of the thread. So first time we passed round the back, second time we're passing round the front. back under, and you can see now that I can hold this loose, that thread's not slackening. Okay, there we go. So we wrap around this twice now, and as you can see, the thread's a bit loose looking there and it's not hanging too natural. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap the thread around and come back down this side to just tighten that up a little bit. So if I hold that tight, thread my thread round the back, come on. There we go. There you go, and you can see how that then just pulls that thread in a little bit, like so. Pull the thread back underneath. Like so, and I'm going to hang a weight on it again. So that is now nice and tight. We've got the block tight, we've got the line tight. So once again, we're going to put some adhesive on there and just lock it all into place. So I'm just going to put some glue on the threads so nothing slips. And now we can just knit this off. Right, we're going to have a look at lashing these two together. Now, I found that this was a little bit long, and so I've redone this because the thimbles were nearly touching. And clearly that's not right. So I removed that and I've retied it quite briefly just to be able to get on with it. So what we've got to do is we've got to lash this together. I'm not sure I've ever done this, to be honest. I don't remember ever doing it, but maybe I have, but I don't think so. So we're gonna just feed it through the bottom one first. Now also there was no reference that I could see on the plans or in the instructions at all, unless I've missed it, but I didn't see that there was any instruction on what thread to use. So I'm using the B2, which is part F17 in your book for this. Basically the thinnest thread, because we want to be able to do it like 4 turns of this if needs be. So what I'm doing is I'm putting the line through roughly the same length, so that we're halfway through. and I think the plan is to go through several times and then tie it off at the back. So we're through one. I think I'm just going to wax the ends just to help with threading. Okay, so hopefully that will help with us threading this now. Can always use a needle threader, can't we? So what I'm doing is the thread that went through the top, I'm now feeding through the bottom at the back, and then the thread that went through the bottom, I thread through the back of the top. Sure that makes sense to you. So that gives us three when we pass this back through. So because it's come through at the front, we're going to feed through at the front. So the one that we've just taken through the bottom will go up and go through the top. I'm guessing that's all making sense to you. There we go. Let's tighten that up a little bit. And then obviously the one that came out through the top, we're going to feed back through the bottom. Okay, so that gives us 3 loops through. Now it does show 4 on the plan. If we lash back through again, we'll have 5. I think that's looking a bit skinny, to be honest. So we're gonna loop through one more time and then tie it off at the back. So once again, the line that came out of the top, we're going to feed back in at the bottom. And the line that came from the bottom, we're going to feed back through at the top. And then this is the last time through, so we take that top line thread it through at the bottom, and bottom line back through the top. There we go. That I think is looking much better in terms of number of turns going through the thimbles. So what I want to do now is just tighten them up a little bit. So if I hold the two threads at the back, so I'm pulling it tight, and just keep gently pulling and move all these lines. There we go. That, I think that looks good. So what we're going to do is just do a basic knot at the back and then glue it and trim it. Now I don't know if this is the correct way of doing it or not. I don't believe I've done this before, but this has definitely worked. So get that knot nice and tight. And we'll get some medium CA on it. There we go. Just keeping it taut while the glue dries. There we go. That doesn't look half bad. So now our glue is dry, which I've left it 5 minutes or so, we can get in there and trim these off, and hopefully this will look quite smart. There we go, I'm happy with that. I think that looks good. So, and we've got a nice distance between the thimbles. And before they were, like I said, they were touching, didn't quite look right. So you want a little bit of a gap there. Okay, so I think the next job for me is tying off the spars. So we've done the upper boom. We've lashed this on, and this is fairly strong now. So next thing is to make sure that the rest of the spars are nicely fixed, because you wouldn't believe how many times you end up knocking these things. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay, so I'm going to do the middle spar first, and what we have to do is we have to start from the spar cleats, go up to the block just below the upper spar, and then we come down and we tie off on one of the Bailey pins. This first line here drops down to Bailey pin position number 9, which is the first Bailey pin on the starboard side. What we have to be keeping an eye on is the fact that we use 2 different threads. So for the middle spar we're using a different thread than the upper spar. So just be mindful of that. So the first thing we want to do is just make a loop. We can use our jig for that. So we're going to make a loop that will go around here, sit around our cleat. So we just want a lashed off loop. Don't get overly het up about accuracy. The rigging on Sherbourne has been deliberately dumbed down a little bit to make it easier for a novice. I mean, on the actual ship you probably would have had a violin block or something like that there, or a much more complicated structure. So we're just going to make a loop that is big enough to go round the end of our mast, but not be slack. So just take a view as to what that should look like. I'm just gonna get a crocodile clip and pinch that closed about there, and I can tie off the knot there with some thread a couple of times, and I know that loop will be big enough. So you've seen me do that before, so I'm going to do that using our little jig. Hang it around the double nails, tie it off, glue it off, tie it off again, glue it off, and then we will estimate the length and we can put this first line on. It's quite a simple process really. So we're going to go from the end where the cleats are through the thimble below the spar above, and then it gets belayed off. So first thing I want to do, having cut a length of thread, and this is F14, is just run it through my block of beeswax. So 2 passes will be enough. That's just going to help that thread behave and takes a bit of the fluffy off. So we're just going to tie this on, and the rigging has been simplified on this model because it's a novice model. So we don't need to worry too much about accuracy. On the actual ship there would have been probably a violin block or something at this point, I would imagine. It's a bit difficult to see what I'm doing. What we're going to do is we're going to tie it on and have one thread left long to go through the block. That's all we're doing. Okay, so I've got this tied. Next job is to thread it through the thimble. This is quite a thin thread, so we shouldn't have a problem getting it through the thimble. I'll go from the back as I see it. There we go. And then we can gently pull that tight, making sure we don't get it tangled. Manage to form a loop around the spar below. We don't want that. So there we go. That looks good. I want that to drop down behind the spar, not ahead of the in front of the spar. So probably I want to thread it through the front of the thimble, then down the back and drop it down. So with that in mind, that's what I'll do. I'll just rethread it. So with that first one on and threaded, I'm going to do the same on the other side, because we want to put weights on them and make sure they're both tight and that the spar is nice and straight when we tie off on the bailey pins. Now there is a diagram on plan sheet 19, rigging plan 8, which shows you how to tie off a bailey pin. I'm gonna try and do it on camera. I'm not sure how easy this is gonna be, but anyway, we will do it. So you'll notice, well, I'm not sure if this is on camera or not, but I have a weight on my thread, just out of shot actually. So halfway between the bailey pin and the lower boom, I've got a little crocodile clip, which is just adding weight and keeping the line taut. The reason for doing that is keeping the line taut will just help keep the tension while we're wrapping this, and then we will tension this and be able to take the crocodile clip off that's acting as a weight, and it should remain tight. If you don't do that, what will happen is, as you're trying to tie this, the thread will slacken and then you'll find it more difficult to tension it again. So we start by going round the back of the bailey pin. I have managed to not quite get my bailey pin to sit all the way down, so I've got a bit less bailey pin at the bottom than I should have really. So anyway, we'll have a go. So we're going to wrap round the back of that bailey pin, come up and loop around this line. So I'm just going to shorten my line because I've got way too much line, and having too much line is as big a problem as having not enough sometimes. So we'll come around the back, like so. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold the thread at the bottom up tight so it doesn't come off the bailey pin. In fact, it might have already come off the bailey pin. There we go. So I'm holding that thread so it doesn't slip, and then it goes round like so. So that is now wrapped around the lower bailey pin. So the next thing you want to do is make a loop by coming back round the bailey pin like so. Cross back in front of your line, and this time you're going to pass between the line thread and come on. So you want to be coming through right here between this thread and the bailey pin and underneath there. So for ease, I've hung the thread over the side of the boat, put a weight on it so that my thread was in the right place underneath the bailey pin, and then what I've done is I've just glued that in so it won't move anymore, and that's partly because my bailey pin's a bit shorter than it should be. So then with the thread that's coming up, we're going to make a loop. See if I can do it so that you see more than just my arm. going to make a loop like that, and the thread passes in front of the loop like so, and then if I can just grab that, put my tweezers in the loop, I can make that loop get smaller, pull it tight, make sure it doesn't unravel, and then guide it over the top of my Bailey pin. Only I've guided it over the top of the wrong one. Let's just get it on the right one. There we go. And then I can wrap around a second time like so. And there you go, that's tied off. So what we will do is I'll just hold that nice and tight there like that. I'm going to put a small amount of glue on the knots of the pin there, and I'm also going to glue it just there at the front where the thread is dangling down, and we can leave that then just for a moment, and then we can trim that and it should look good. So just relax my finger, yeah, that seems okay, so I can get in and trim that to the length I want. So there you go. I probably made that look more difficult than it actually is, just because it's so difficult to do on camera. But there is a nice drawing. Follow the drawing and do some practice on the end of a pencil or a paintbrush handle or something like that, so you've got your head around it before you do it. So that is nice and tight. I'm going to go and do the other line, and then we should be ready to move on to the next task.